Moving on to Wiki Pedagogy. As Sarah has mentioned, we want our students to feel connected, to belong, to the campus, and to the larger community. In that spirit of connecting to place, I devised a semester Wikipedia project in a public writing course that would enable students to meet course learning outcomes. Those outcomes call for domain knowledge in rhetoric, writing processes, genre, and style. First, some context. Alaska is a storied place with a history of people thriving in a harsh climate, a story of nomadic subsistence cultures, a story of advanced technologies and diverse languages, adapted to northern hunting and gathering, shelter building, transportation, and clothing design, of diverse peoples reaching a helping hand to travelers, inept and ill-equipped to survive. It is also a story of settlers who laid claim to unceded territory, who transmitted disease, colonized indigenous peoples, and forced settlement by holding children hostage. A story of natural resource extraction that enriched many nations. A project like this cannot bring justice to the past, but it can begin to invite students into a deeper understanding and appreciation for places and the people of place, an invitation to explore and fill in a few gaps while practicing their writing for a global audience within defined constraints. So we began with stories in order to build an understanding and appreciation for the lived experience of notable Alaskans. I began by interviewing Libby Roderick, singer-songwriter, director of our Difficult Dialogues initiative, climate activist, ally and advocate for Alaska Native ways of being and knowing, and the daughter of Anchorage's first mayor, Jack Roderick. Libby came of age during the oil boom that transformed Alaska's economy and relationships to the land. I invited Arlene Schmuland, campus archivist, to join us and talk about Jack Roderick's papers. I happened to have a geology student in class, so I'd located an exemplary Wikipedia article on Ruth Schmidt, a geologist who spent most of her career in Alaska. When I showed that article to Arlene, she knew immediately who had authored it, because author 97198 had researched in the archive. Turned out the author was Dr. Sine Anahita, a colleague from Fairbanks. I invited Sine to discuss her research and writing processes and to share what inspired her to climb the editorial learning curve while facing Wikipedia's many constraints. Her article on Ruth Schmidt is well worth reading. I next interviewed Professor Amber Christensen Fulmer, Director of Native Student Services. Amber's self-introduction was holistic and reflected the complex mixed heritage of many Indigenous Alaskans. She candidly discussed the limitations of Wikipedia's 5 pillars, as well as the possibilities for transforming the encyclopedia. During our discussion, we discovered a productive talk page argument over renaming Barrow and the redirect to Uktiagvik, the city's now official name. I also discovered that some editors had been very busy adding native place names to numerous Alaskan locations, whose official names continue to reflect stories of settlement. I interviewed Peg Tileston, longtime citizen and environmental activist. She's a board member of Alaska Common Ground that encourages citizen involvement and publishing by publishing a weekly list of all meetings and events across the state that address environmental issues. Her practice and faith in grassroots engagement was a perfect spirit for fledgling wiki editors. Inspired by Jack Roderick's bipartisanship, I invited Senator Elvie Gray Jackson, who, in her own words, is a phoenix rising from the ashes of racism, to share her stories and those of other Black Alaskans who have migrated north. She forgives, but never forgets. History professor Ian Hartman was eager to sit in on the interview. His research focuses on and engages students in visiting the archive to study the local history of African Americans. He was able to cite sources and evidence to support Elvie's experiences. I closed the series by interviewing David Reamer, a public historian who writes a weekly column for the local newspaper, highlighting the stories of notable yet still unknown Alaskans. He pursues an eclectic search strategy. Peg Tileston mentioned him as someone I needed to interview. These interviews were a joy, and they set a rich context for the class, and student response and engagement were overwhelmingly positive. I will place these interviews on a slide so that you can explore them if you'd like to. Though I envisioned a wiki project prior to the pandemic called for intentional focus, what I termed a semester of intentional design. I accepted that we would meet in a virtual world, connecting as a community of practice through digital technologies. The interview series formed a rich context in which to question content gaps. By animating the project with stories of lived experience, I was able to feed students with possibilities before they faced the constraints of notability, verifiability, and neutral point of view, constraints that potentially drain the life out of biographical stories. The constraints are real. Wikipedia privileges text-based cultures and marginalizes oral cultures, emphasizes men over women, white over BIPOC, and embraces the place names of colonization. The project ultimately provided students practice they needed with academic literacies and writing information literacy. Writing is not only a process, but a subject of study in its own right. In College Writing and Beyond, Anne Beaufort identifies knowledge domains that support writing development. Within the Wikipedia community of practice, supported by the Wiki Education Foundation, students are surrounded by support systems that reinforce domain knowledge. That support includes tutorials and exercises, bibliographic management tools, genre and peer review templates, established good article criteria, and wiki.edu staff who place offers to help new editors on each of their user pages. Shortly after Wikipedia was born, same time around when many of our students were born, Rolf Norgaard proposed that writing and information literacy are not separate but connected. So he deleted the conjunction. The title of his article, Writing Information Literacy, Contributions to a Concept, caught a glimpse of the future when librarians and writing faculty would establish complementary frameworks that define threshold concepts. 3 pairs of such concepts proved directly relevant to the Wikipedia project, and they correspond directly to Beaufort's knowledge domains in the previous slide. Informed writing is dialogic, it adopts a meaningful design, and it constructs authority within a community of practice. I'll elaborate on each of these. Informed writing is dialogic and reinforces rhetorical knowledge. It merges 2 concepts, that research is a conversation and that writing is a social and rhetorical act. These integrated concepts are reinforced by talk pages and source citation tools. Informed writing adopts a meaningful design and builds genre knowledge. It merges 2 concepts, that information creation is a process, and that writing speaks to situations through recognizable forms. These concepts are reinforced by permanent historical record of contributions and changes, by good article criteria and the ORA's predictive quality rating, it's kind of an artificial intelligence rating, genre templates, and sandboxes. Informed writing constructs authority within a community of practice and relies on subject matter and discourse community knowledge. It merges 2 concepts, that authority is constructed and contextual, and that writing enacts and creates identities and ideologies. These concepts are reinforced by the selection of usernames, Wikifauna identities, and a number of wiki education resources. Perhaps most fun was watching students select and write about Wikifauna that matched their developing identities. Student choices revealed fears and aspirations. Wiki elves work behind the scenes. Wiki gnomes make useful incremental edits. Wiki fairies beautify Wikipedia by organizing messy articles, improving style, and adding color and graphics. Wiki hobbits are niche experts. Sweet, simple folk who make constructive edits and avoid edit wars by working on specialized topics. Wiki hens are ready and eager to make an article, but afraid their info's wrong or that something might happen if they try to edit. Wiki kittens need help and attention to become good editors, but most of the time they manage on their own. Wiki puppies are good faith newcomers with little experience who think Wikipedia is a social networking site. They're comfortable in draft space, but reluctant to go public in the main space. And students were quite adept at understanding who they are and how they like to operate as writers. As I look back over 2 semesters, one still in progress, average attendance has exceeded 95%, so strong engagement. 2/3 have perfect attendance. One article achieved a B class rating, and several made it up to C class rating. One student faced limits with archival research, struggled to add images from a state library, and persuaded an editor not to delete her article. She didn't know she had that in her at the beginning, but her commitment grew through the semester. And you can see a couple of reflections about the wiki fauna as well as one of the interviews. The semesters have been quite productive. As you can see, there's quite a host of interconnected articles that have been produced or projected still in progress. And you can see the interconnections between them. And that's something, that level of intertextuality and connection that we started with, and was one of the goals of the project, really comes to the surface when you look at these various articles and how they're connected to one another. Thank you for listening.